Far Cry was the beginning of a long-running series that now spans decades. Starting out basically as a tech demo, developer Crytek scrambled to build a game around it after it was greenlit, and as a result we got a game that was something we hadn't seen much by 2004. A massively open world where you could tackle objectives mostly in the way you wanted yourself, something that is now a staple for the series. The game was also known to be very demanding for the day, and it was an opportunity to really show what your rig was capable of, or wasn't in some cases. For the video today, my friend Sucre and I will explore what the experience was playing this game back in 2004 on a machine that fits the minimum requirements and one that lines up with the recommended requirements. Welcome back to Rick's Random Retro, where we do the bare minimum. First off, let's establish what the minimum requirements are to play Far Cry. Taking a look at the box, supposedly the game will run on something as low as Windows 98 on a Pentium 3 machine at 1 GHz with 256 MB of RAM and a Radeon 8500 video card. Remember, this was released in 2004, and this is a game that had a reputation for being demanding to run back in the day. Crysis before Crysis was actually a thing. So, the recommended specs might be a bit more reasonable for 2004 with a 2 GHz processor, 1 GB RAM, and a much newer video card, which Sucre will show shortly. To cover the minimum requirements, I have this build featuring a Pentium 3 clocked at 933 MHz, 256 MB of RAM, as well as a Radeon 8500 all-in-wonder video card installed in the AGP slot. That lines up very close to the minimum requirements, short of 77 MHz to hit that cool 1 GB, but it should still provide us with a good test for the scenario of course running Windows 98. Hey, when we said minimum requirements, we really wanted to put that to the test. The machine gave me an endless amount of trouble unrelated to the game, but that's just the way it is with retro. I had the best experience running the game not on the newest update, but rather 1.3, with 1.4 being the last official patch released by Crytek. Let's take a look at the game and see what we got. Exiting the starting bunker and stepping into what is supposed to be the first ooh and ah moment of Far Cry, it's a bit muted here. The low resolution of 800 by 600 hampers the experience, and with all settings turned down to low, many of the hallmark graphical flares we've come to expect are missing.
Stay low and avoid contact if possible. You don't really want to alert the guards.
You see something?
Still, considering what we are running on here, the frame rate stays reasonable through the experience with the obvious hiccups during firefights, which is totally expected. The Radeon 8500 does its best to keep up, and we're actually pulling in respectable numbers around 30 FPS, which is honestly better than I was anticipating. Is it completely smooth? No, not by a long shot, but you know, it's not bad. Although you can tell there's a definite struggle for the game engine to keep up. Pop-ins of objects happen often, enemies just sort of appear, and whatever the heck this is. Looking at the quality, that's where things really become noticeable. Trees and bushes are blurry-looking blobs with poor definition. The water, while impressively still holding some transparency, is very muted and offers little in the way of extra flair. Wall textures are blurry and undefined. The level of detail cutoff is hilariously close to the viewpoint. You can see the already blurry ground is even blurrier further out. And that's the sacrifice you have to make playing Far Cry on a machine like this, but I will give Crytek props in that they managed to make the game in a way where it's not great, but it actually still runs on a machine of this caliber. And that covers the bare minimum requirements, which we saw was not a great experience, but it was passable. Perhaps not the best way to enjoy the game, but if this is what you had when Far Cry launched, I've definitely seen worse showings. But what about playing the game on a machine using the recommended specs? Let's go over to Sucre to see how the game runs on his machine.
For the recommended settings, the game requires a Pentium 4 2 GHz. That's exactly what I have here on the Universal AGP test system I put together a few months ago. The game box does recommend the Sound Blaster Audigy series. We have an Audigy 2ZS, always a great card to use in Windows XP. And for the video card, the game recommends a series of NVIDIA cards and ATI cards from the Radeon 9500 to the 9800 XT. I got something very close to the fastest video card mentioned, the Radeon 9800 Pro, which should perform very close to the XT. In my experience, the Radeon 9800 Pro tramples over the 2 GHz Pentium 4. But that's what the game box says, so that's what we're using. For the RAM memory, it recommends 512 MB to 1 GB. We have 1 GB of RAM and it lists Windows 98, 2000 and XP. It doesn't recommend a specific OS, but since Windows XP was the newer OS back then, we're going with that. We're going to let the game auto-detect settings, and we can see it sets many options to medium, so that's already an indication that the recommended specs are not what you need to max out the graphics in this game. For the resolution, I started with 1024 by 768 and changed it to 1280 by 1024, and that made no difference in performance. First thoughts when you step out to the beautiful beach is that it does look great. Water looks awesome, there are tons of crispy vegetation, but also frame rate is not great. Things are not looking so good for the 2 GHz Pentium 4 right now. Effects like the explosion on this barrel, and explosions are very common in this game, do tank the frame rate even more. I don't know if it's related to muscle memory or something with this game in particular, but to be completely frank, playing this game at 30 FPS doesn't bother me too much, seems almost natural. Not to say it wouldn't benefit from higher FPS, it definitely would be a more pleasant gaming experience. As for rendering issues, there were none with this system. That's not to say the game runs perfectly. The 2 GHz Pentium 4 really struggles when there's a lot of scenery on the screen, like when you have a wide open field of view. It becomes specifically difficult to drive the vehicles in third person because it opens up the FOV so much. Now to take a look at the details, I have nothing to complain here. Vegetation is full and crispy. Compared to Rick's video, it kinda seems like a completely different game. Water looks as it should. It was one of the more stunning features of this game when it came out. You can even see effects of tiny waves on the shore and the foam, which you don't have in the minimum settings. Textures inside the cabin look very good and sharp, with the bonus that indoors the FPS shoots up as the FOV gets minimized and takes the load off the CPU. Texture on the ground is only a bit blurry from dithering, but it's just as expected, and the rich vegetation of how the game is supposed to look really covers it up and makes the scenario look great. And this is what you got if you had a system with the recommended settings when this game came out, with the low FPS being a courtesy of our 2 GHz Pentium 4.
I've spotted the carrier. Now tell me, how do I get in?
I've only been there once, but I remember there was a hole in
Now that we've seen the game running both on the minimum and recommended specs, we have the modern day luxury of playing this game on a much more powerful PC than was possible in 2004. This may be what Crytek had in mind when they developed Far Cry, and in this case running it on a machine that's newer but not completely modern is as expected much better. This is running on a Core 2 quad machine using a GeForce 8800 GTS video card. Even with settings turned up in most cases, it's much smoother with a much more stable frame rate even at the higher resolution of 1280 by 960. Let's take one more look at all three machines at roughly the same part for that final comparison. To say there's a difference in the visuals may be an understatement.
Stay low and avoid contact if possible. You don't really want to alert the guards.
Playing Far Cry today really shows that while the series is about to crank out the 6th game, it has stayed true to the original formula while adding more and more. It's fascinating to watch so many of the ideas having matured over time, regardless of how you might feel about the series as a whole and its many installments. Either way, seeing how the original game runs on these machines and seeing how the people experience it might have varied wildly is fascinating to say the least. Either way, if you enjoyed this comparison video, let us know, and we may make it a series with more minimum and recommended requirements explored for different games. Also, definitely check out Suka's full video, linked below, for his perspective. It was a fun collaboration, and I hope you enjoyed watching it as much as we did making it. As always, thank you very much for watching, and until next time. If you enjoyed this video, perhaps you'd like to take a look at some of my other ones. I cover a range of retro topics between computers and classic gaming. Find me on social media, or if you'd like to catch me live, be sure to tune in on Thursdays at 8:45 p.m. Central for my weekly live stream.